The wind came hard across the flats that September afternoon, kicking up dust devils that spun and died against the wooden storefronts of Clearwater Station. Caleb Rourke stood outside the trading post, hat pulled low, watching the eastern road like it owed him money. It didn't, but the woman on that stagecoach might. Not money exactly, more like answers, or at least a presence, someone to fill the silence that had grown so thick in his cabin he could practically chew it. Someone to make the territorial claims officer shut up about proving residency and maintaining a domestic establishment. The kind of bureaucratic horseshit that made a man consider mail-order marriage just to keep his land. Caleb spat into the dirt. 6 years since Appomattox, 4 since he'd claimed this piece of Wyoming scrub, and he still felt like he was fighting someone else's war. Just different rules now, different weapons. The stagecoach appeared first as a dark smudge against the pale horizon, then slowly materialized into something solid, dirty canvas sides, 6 laboring horses, wheels that squealed like dying animals. It pulled up in front of the station house in a cloud of alkali dust that made Caleb's eyes water. He didn't move, just watched. The driver climbed down first, bow-legged and cursing. Then the door opened. 3 passengers. A fat man in a bowler hat who immediately started complaining about the road. A skinny kid, maybe 15, who looked half dead from dysentery or fear. And then her, Eliza Whitmore. She wasn't what he expected. The letters, brief, formal things exchanged through the matrimonial agency, had said she was 26, educated, experienced in teaching. He'd pictured someone sturdy, practical, maybe a little plain the way women got when life had worn the softness off them. The woman who stepped down from that coach was none of those things. She was thin, too thin, like she'd been sick or hadn't eaten properly in weeks. Dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Dress that had been nice once, maybe, but was now road-stained and wrinkled beyond repair. But it was her face that stopped him. She looked hunted. Not scared, exactly. Hunted. Like something had been chasing her for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. Their eyes met across 20 feet of Wyoming dust, and Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. She broke the look first, glancing down at the carpet bag the driver had tossed at her feet with more force than necessary. Her hands were shaking. Caleb pushed off from the trading post wall and walked over. His boots crunched in the gravel. She watched him come, and he saw her jaw tighten, like she was steeling herself for something. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes." Her voice was steady, at least. Eastern accent, educated. "Mr. Rourke?" He nodded. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the way her dress hung loose on her frame. Could see the slight tremor in her hands that she was trying hard to hide. "You look different than your photograph," he said. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it the second the words left his mouth. But hell, it was true. The daguerreotype she'd sent had shown a composed woman with soft features and calm eyes. This woman looked like she'd been pulled through a keyhole backward. Something flickered across her face. Anger, maybe, or shame. The photograph was taken 2 years ago, before... She stopped herself, swallowed. "I apologize for the deception. Wasn't calling it deception, just making an observation." "Of course." She looked away, toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth to the west. "I understand if you've changed your mind about the arrangement." Caleb studied her. Everything about this felt wrong. The agency had vouched for her. Good character, excellent references, seeking a fresh start in the territories. But standing here now, watching her hold herself together with what looked like pure stubbornness, he knew there was more to it. A smart man would thank her for coming, pay her stage fare back to Cheyenne, and find someone else. Someone without whatever shadow was dogging this woman's heels. "Got a wagon around back?" he heard himself say. "Ranch is 8 miles north. We can talk there." Relief flooded her face so fast and raw it was almost embarrassing to witness. "Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet." He picked up her carpet bag. It was lighter than he expected. "You might change your own mind once you see the place." She followed him to the wagon without another word. The ride-out was silent except for the creak of wood and the steady plod of his horses. Caleb didn't push for conversation. He could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a stove, and he figured she'd talk when she was ready. Or she wouldn't. Either way. The land rolled past them, endless grass already yellowing with the coming autumn, scattered sage, the occasional stand of cottonwoods marking a creek bed. Empty country, hard country, the kind that didn't forgive mistakes. It's very... Eliza started, then trailed off. Empty? Open? She said carefully. I'm from Boston originally. Everything there is. Close. Can't get much further from Boston than this. No. She almost smiled. I suppose not. They hit a rough patch and she grabbed the wagon seat to steady herself. Caleb noticed her hands again, small, fine-boned, but with calluses he hadn't expected. Not fresh ones either. Old calluses, like she'd been doing hard work for a while. Didn't match with the school teacher story. You been teaching long, Cheese? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. She went rigid. Several years, in various positions. That was a dodge if he'd ever heard one, but he let it slide. Whatever she was running from, he'd find out eventually. Small communities had a way of shaking secrets loose, whether you wanted them out or not. The ranch came into view about an hour before sunset, a collection of rough buildings clustered against a low ridge that offered some protection from the north wind. Main cabin, barn, couple of outbuildings that leaned like drunk men. Beyond that, maybe 200 head of cattle scattered across the near pasture and 3 horses in the corral. Not much, but it was his. This is it, Caleb said, pulling the wagon up in front of the cabin. Not fancy, but it's solid. Built most of it myself. Eliza climbed down before he could help her, looking around with an expression he couldn't read. Not disappointment exactly, more like calculation. How many acres? She asked. 640. Full section. Got water rights on Crow Creek, good grazing. Could run 500 head if I had the capital and the help. And you manage it alone? Got 2 hired men, live in the bunkhouse. They're out with the herd right now, won't be back till tomorrow. He grabbed her bag and headed for the cabin. Come on, I'll show you inside. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft and a kitchen area at one end. Clean, Caleb kept it that way, but sparse. Table, chairs, a cook stove, his bunk along the far wall. Window facing east to catch the morning light. Floor was packed earth covered with split logs he'd adzed flat himself. There's a well out back, he said, setting her bag down. Privy's past the barn. I usually eat with the hands, but we can... Mr. Rourke. She turned to face him, and he saw that hunted look was back. I need to tell you something before we go any further. Here it was, the truth, or some version of it. All right. She took a breath, squared her shoulders. The matrimonial agency. They don't know everything, about why I left Massachusetts, about what happened there. Figured as much. That seemed to surprise her. You did? Lady shows up looking like she's been running for her life, I tend to notice. He pulled out a chair, sat down. So what happened? She didn't sit. Stood there with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though the cabin was warm. I was teaching at a girls' academy, Beacon Hill Academy. Very prestigious, very... She paused, searching for words. Particular about reputation. Okay. There was a man, Jonathan Aldrich, prominent family. He is engaged to the daughter of one of the school's benefactors, but he... Her voice went tight. He pursued me, aggressively. I refused him, multiple times. And then he told people that we had what? Behaved inappropriately, together, engaged in an affair. The words came out clipped, hard. It wasn't true, none of it. But his family had money, influence. His fiancée's family owned half the school board. When I denied it, they called me a liar. Said I was trying to trap him into marriage or ruin him out of spite. The headmistress dismissed me. Put word out to every school in Boston, then every school in Massachusetts, that I was of questionable moral character. Caleb watched her. She was shaking now, but her eyes were dry, angry. So you came west. After 6 months of watching every door close in my face, yes, I came west. She lifted her chin. The agency in Cheyenne didn't ask many questions. I didn't volunteer many answers. But you should know, if anyone looks into my past, if anyone writes to Massachusetts, they'll hear that I'm disgraced, ruined, unfit for polite society. That true? No. But it doesn't matter what's true. It matters what people believe. Caleb leaned back in his chair, considering. This was the part where he should send her packing. Before she brought her trouble to his doorstep, complicated his life, maybe cost him his standing with the other ranchers. But hell, standing with other ranchers had never been high on his priority list anyway. You know how to cook? He asked. She blinked. Yes, adequately. Can you sew? Mend clothes? Yes. Ever handled livestock? No, but I can learn. Winters here get down to 30 below. You spend 3-4 months snowed in with nothing but wind and silence. You think you can handle that? Mr. Rourke, I spent 6 months being destroyed by gossip and lies while people I thought were friends crossed the street to avoid me. I watched my entire life dissolve because a man I rejected decided my reputation was worth less than his pride. I can handle silence just fine. There was steel in her voice now. Under all that fear and exhaustion, she had spine. Caleb made his decision. Here's what I'm thinking, he said. We don't rush into anything. You stay here, help run the place, see if you can stand it. Give it a month. If it works, we go through with the marriage. Legal, binding, everything proper. You get half interest in the ranch, full partnership. If it doesn't work, I pay your passage to wherever you want to go, and we part ways, no hard feelings. She stared at him. You do that? Give me a share of your ranch? I need a partner, not a servant, and I need someone who's going to stay, not run off first time things get difficult. Giving you a real stake seems like the best way to ensure that. But you don't know me. I could be everything they said I was. I could be worse. Could be, he agreed. But I spent 4 years watching men die over land that wasn't theirs, fighting for causes that weren't theirs, following orders from people who didn't give a damn if they lived or not. Taught me pretty quick how to tell the difference between someone lying and someone who's been lied about. And which am I? He looked at her straight. You're someone who got a raw deal and is trying to survive it. Same as most people out here. Her eyes went bright, and for a second he thought she might cry. But she didn't. Just nodded once, sharp. 1 month, she said. That's fair. All right then. He stood up. You take the loft. I'll bunk down here. Gives you some privacy. Tomorrow I'll show you around, introduce you to the men, start teaching you how things work. Mr. Rourke, Caleb, if we're going to be partners, you should probably use my name. Caleb. She tested it out like she was trying on new clothes. Thank you for giving me a chance. Don't thank me yet, he said for the second time that day. Month from now, you might wish you'd stayed on that stagecoach. But she smiled then, small, tired, but real. I doubt that. After she'd climbed up to the loft and he heard the ropes creak as she lay down on the mattress, Caleb sat at the table and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Bringing a woman with a scandal attached to her name, setting her up as a partner in his ranch, betting his entire future on whether she could handle Wyoming and whether the local community would accept her. Probably the dumbest thing he'd done since he charged that Confederate position at Cold Harbor with a bayonet and no ammunition. But watching her step off that stage, seeing that look in her eyes, defiant and terrified and determined all at once, something in him had recognized something in her. They were both trying to build new lives from the wreckage of old ones. Maybe that was enough. Morning came cold and clear. Caleb woke to find Eliza already up, standing at the stove with the coffee pot heating. She changed into a simpler dress, brown calico that looked more practical than the traveling clothes. Her hair was still pulled back tight, but she looked steadier, more present. Found the coffee, she said. Hope you don't mind. Mind? I'm grateful. He pulled on his boots. You sleep? Some. The quiet takes getting used to. Wait till winter, then you'll understand quiet. She poured him a cup, and they drank in companionable silence while the sun came up and turned the frost on the windows to gold. So what's first? She asked. What do I need to learn? Everything, he said, but we'll start with the basics, how to handle the chickens, milk the cow, feed the horses, work up from there. She nodded, and he saw her jaw set with that same determination from last night. Then let's start. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Eliza threw herself into ranch work with the intensity of someone who knew this was her last chance at anything resembling a normal life. Caleb taught her how to feed the stock, how to mend fence, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds and the behavior of cattle. She learned fast, asked good questions, didn't complain even when the work left her hands blistered and her back aching. The hired men, Jack and Pete, both leathery ex-soldiers who drifted west after the war, regarded her with polite suspicion at first. But when she mucked out stalls without being asked and didn't flinch when a rattler showed up in the woodpile, they warmed up. "She'll do," Jack said one evening, watching Eliza carry water buckets from the well. "Got sand in her anyway." High praise from Jack, who trusted approximately nobody. But it wasn't all smooth. The third night, Caleb woke to sounds from the loft, harsh breathing, like someone trying not to cry. He lay there in the dark, listening, knowing he should probably say something but having no idea what. Eventually it stopped. In the morning, Eliza's eyes were red-rimmed, but she didn't mention it, and neither did he. On Sunday, they rode into Clearwater Station for supplies. Caleb needed salt, ammunition, and coffee. Eliza needed fabric. Her dresses were wearing thin and she wanted to make something sturdier for ranch work. The town was small, maybe 300 souls if you counted the outlying ranches. One main street with a dozen businesses, trading post, blacksmith, doctor's office that doubled as the dentist's, 2 saloons, a boarding house, and a church at the far end. Caleb tied up outside the trading post and helped Eliza down from the wagon. She looked nervous. "Small town," he said quietly. "People talk. Just ignore it." "I'm used to being talked about." "Not like this, you're not. Here it's not malicious, mostly. Just curious. Everybody knows everybody's business, and your new business." She straightened her shoulders. "Then let's give them something to talk about." Inside, the trading post smelled like leather and coffee and lamp oil. Martha Hendricks, who ran the place with her husband Tom, looked up from the counter and her eyes went wide. "Caleb Rourke, heard you'd gone and gotten yourself a wife." "Not yet," Caleb said. "Miss Whitmore is staying at the ranch for a trial period. We're figuring out if we suit." Martha's eyes sharpened with interest. "That's so. Well, Miss Whitmore, welcome to Clearwater Station. We don't get many new ladies out here. Most women take one look at this country and run screaming back to civilization." "I'm not most women," Eliza said pleasantly. "Clearly." Martha came around the counter. She was a big woman, solid as an oak tree, with a face that had been pretty once and was now just weathered. "What can I do for you folks?" They gave their order, and while Tom was filling it, Martha engaged Eliza in conversation. Where was she from? What did she think of Wyoming? Had she taught school before? Eliza answered carefully, giving truth, but not all of it. Yes, she'd taught in Massachusetts. Yes, she found Wyoming challenging but beautiful. Yes, she was adjusting to ranch life. Caleb watched the exchange like he was watching a card game, trying to figure out what hands were being played. Martha was smart, no fool. She'd hear about Eliza's past eventually. Someone always wrote letters, always dug into newcomers' histories. But for now, she seemed willing to take Eliza at face value. "You should come to the ladies' social," Martha said. "We meet every other Thursday at the church. Sewing circle, mostly, but it's a chance to meet the other women, get to know folks." "That's very kind," Eliza said. "Not kind, practical. Out here, we depend on each other. Winter comes, you might need help. Best to make friends before you need them." It was good advice, and Caleb saw Eliza take it in. They left with their supplies and ran into Reverend Walsh on the street. He was a thin man with kind eyes and a habit of quoting scripture at inappropriate moments. "Caleb, heard congratulations might be in order." "Might be," Caleb said. "Nothing settled yet." "Well, when it is, you come see me. Be happy to perform the ceremony." He tipped his hat to Eliza. "Miss Whitmore, pleasure to meet you. I hope you'll join us for services." "Perhaps," Eliza said noncommittally. After they'd loaded the wagon and started back, Eliza was quiet. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "They were kind. I didn't expect that." "Why wouldn't they be?" "In Boston, once the rumors started." She shook her head. People I'd known for years wouldn't speak to me. Women I'd had tea with crossed the street to avoid me. It was like I'd ceased to exist as a person. I became just this thing. This scandalous thing that had to be avoided. This isn't Boston. People out here, they're more interested in what you can do than who you used to be. I hope you're right. I'm not saying there won't be talk, Caleb said honestly. There will be. But most folks will judge you on how you handle yourself, not on gossip from 2,000 miles away. She looked at him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. Do you? Judge me on how I handle myself? What else would I judge you on? What I've been accused of? What people said? Caleb thought about that while the wagon rattled over a rocky stretch. When I came back from the war, he said finally, I had nightmares. Still do sometimes. I'd wake up screaming, seeing things that weren't there. People in town, they'd look at me different. Like I was broken, dangerous maybe. Some folks told me I should go to an asylum, get fixed. What did you do? Came out here, built something. Figured if I was broken, at least I could be broken somewhere nobody had to watch. Wow. He glanced at her. Point is, I know what it's like when people decide who you are based on things you can't control. Don't much care for it. So no, I don't judge you on what some bastard in Boston said about you. I judge you on whether you can look me in the eye, do honest work, and keep your word. So far, you're 3 for 3. Eliza didn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, Thank you. You keep saying that, gonna wear it out. She smiled. Then I'll find other words. The weeks rolled on. Eliza learned to ride, badly at first, then with increasing competence. She learned to shoot, which surprised both of them when she turned out to have a decent eye. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, when to feed what, how to tell a sick cow from a healthy one, how to check fence lines and predict weather. She also started teaching. It happened by accident. One of the neighboring ranchers, a man named Sullivan, had 3 kids who'd never seen the inside of a schoolhouse. When he heard there was an educated woman at the Rourke place, he asked if Eliza might be willing to teach them letters and numbers a few hours a week. Caleb expected her to refuse. Too much like the life she'd left behind, but instead, her face had lit up. Yes, she'd said. Yes, I'd like that very much. So twice a week, the Sullivan kids would ride over, and Eliza would teach them in the cabin. Reading, writing, arithmetic, a little history. She was good at it, patient and clear. Caleb would watch sometimes from the doorway, seeing her transform from the cautious, hunted woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach into someone confident and alive. This was who she really was, he realized. Not the scandal or the shame. This. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Eliza was out checking the chickens when she heard shouting from the direction of Crow Creek. She ran, arriving to find Jack and Pete trying to pull a calf out of the mud. The animal was stuck up to its shoulders, bellowing in panic, while its mother paced frantically on the bank. Rope broke, Jack said through gritted teeth. Can't get enough leverage. Eliza didn't hesitate. She waded in, mud sucking at her boots, and got on the other side of the calf. Together, the 3 of them heaved. The calf came free with a sound like a boot being pulled from mud, stumbled, and scrambled up the bank to its mother. Eliza stood there, covered head to toe in stinking creek mud, breathing hard. Pete started laughing first, then Jack, then Eliza, doubling over with it, the kind of laughter that came from relief and exhaustion and the sheer absurdity of standing in a creek in Wyoming covered in cow shit. When Caleb found them 20 minutes later, they were still laughing. Do I want to know? He asked. Probably not, Eliza said, wringing mud out of her skirt. But the calf is fine. That night, after she'd bathed in the copper tub they'd hauled into the cabin and changed into clean clothes, she sat at the table while Caleb made dinner. I've been thinking, she said. About? The month is almost up. Caleb's hand stilled over the pot. Yeah, I know. I want to stay, if the offer still stands. He turned to look at her. She met his eyes steadily, no hesitation. It stands, he said. You sure? This isn't an easy life, Eliza. It's not going to get easier. I'm sure. I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in a long time. She folded her hands on the table. I like it here. I like the work. I like who I am when I'm doing it. And I think we work well together as partners. We do, Caleb agreed. He sat down across from her. All right then, we'll ride into town tomorrow. Talk to Reverend Walsh. Get it done proper. Just like that? Just like that. Unless you want something fancier? No. She shook her head quickly. No, simple is good. Simple is better. Simple it is. They sat there in the lamplight, and Caleb thought about how strange life was. A month ago, he'd been standing in the dust outside the trading post, watching a stranger step off a stagecoach. Now that stranger was about to become his wife, his partner, the person he'd be building this ranch with for the rest of his life. He should probably be more nervous about it, but he wasn't. One thing, Eliza said. What's that? When people ask about my past, and they will, what do we tell them? Caleb considered. The truth, that you taught in Massachusetts, came west for a fresh start. If they want more than that, they're being nosy and can go to hell. She smiled. That's very direct. I'm a direct man. I'm noticing that. The next morning, they rode to Clearwater Station under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Eliza wore her best dress, the one she'd arrived in, cleaned and mended. Caleb had shaved and put on a clean shirt. They looked like what they were, two people about to make a serious decision with a minimum of fuss. Reverend Walsh was in his small office behind the church, working on Sunday's sermon. He looked up when they knocked, and his face broke into a smile. Ah, made your decision, have you? We have, Caleb said. Can you marry us today? Today? Well, I suppose... Yes, of course. Let me get my book. He rummaged around on his desk. Do you have witnesses? We'll find some, Caleb said. They found Martha and Tom Hendricks at the trading post, and the four of them walked to the church together. It was a small ceremony, no music, no flowers, just the words that made it legal. Eliza's hand was cold in Caleb's when they exchanged vows, but her voice was steady. I, Eliza Whitmore, take you, Caleb Rourke? I, Caleb Rourke, take you, Eliza Whitmore. Just words, but words that changed everything. When it was done, Martha hugged Eliza. Welcome to the territory, Mrs. Rourke. Mrs. Rourke. Eliza tested the name silently, and Caleb saw something settle in her expression, like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. They rode back to the ranch in the afternoon light, legally married, partners in every sense that mattered. Caleb felt the weight of it, the responsibility, the commitment, the sheer audacity of what they'd just done. Nervous? Eliza asked. Little bit. You? Terrified, she admitted, but in a good way, like standing at the edge of something and deciding to jump. Long as we jump together, we'll be fine. She looked at him, and he saw trust there, real trust, earned over weeks of shared work and honest dealing. Together, she agreed. When they got back to the ranch, Jack and Pete had strung up a banner made from an old sheet with congratulations painted on it in what looked like axle grease. There was a bottle of whiskey on the table, good stuff, not rot gut, and Pete had shot a turkey. Figured you'd want some kind of celebration, Jack said gruffly. Appreciate it, Caleb said. They ate turkey and drank whiskey and told stories as the sun went down. Eliza laughed at Jack's terrible jokes and held her liquor better than Caleb expected. The men drifted off to the bunkhouse eventually, leaving Caleb and Eliza alone in the cabin. Well, Eliza said, we did it. We did. What happens now? Caleb looked at her, his wife, his partner, this woman who'd taken a risk on him just like he'd taken a risk on her. Now we make it work, build the ranch, get through winter, see what we're made of. Sounds hard. Probably will be. Good, Eliza said. I'm done with easy. She climbed up to the loft like she had every night, and Caleb bedded down below. Married, but taking it slow. Giving themselves time to figure out what this was going to be. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. First storm would hit soon, maybe in a week or two. Then they'd be snowed in for months, just the two of them, and whatever they could build between them. Caleb lay in the dark. listening to the cabin settle, and thought about the choice he'd made. To give this woman a chance, to bet his future on someone everyone else had written off. Crazy, probably. Reckless, definitely. But standing in that dust, watching her step off the stagecoach, something in him had known. She was broken in the same places he was. And maybe, just maybe, they could use their broken pieces to build something stronger than either of them could manage alone. Time would tell. Time and winter and whatever came after. For now, they had a deal made in dust, a marriage made in good faith, and a ranch that needed building. It would have to be enough. The first snow came 2 weeks after the wedding, fat flakes that started before dawn, and didn't stop until they'd buried the world under 8 inches of white. Eliza woke to the strange, muffled silence of it, that particular quiet that only comes when snow swallows sound. She climbed down from the loft to find Caleb already dressed, standing at the window with a cup of coffee. "It's beautiful," she said. He glanced at her. "It's early. We usually don't get snow like this until November. Means it's going to be a hard winter." "How hard?" "Hard enough." He set his cup down. "We need to get the cattle closer to the ranch. Can't have them scattered across 600 acres when the real storms hit. They'll drift with the wind and we'll lose half of them in ravines or frozen creeks." Eliza pulled on her coat. "What do you need me to do?" "Can you ride well enough to help move them?" She thought about the hours she'd spent in the saddle over the past month, the bruises and the fear, and the gradual understanding of how to read a horse's movement. "I can try." Good enough. They spent the next 3 days moving cattle. It was brutal work, long hours in the saddle, pushing 200 stubborn animals across snow-covered ground, while the wind cut through every layer of clothing. Eliza's hands went numb inside her gloves. Her face burned with cold. She fell off her horse twice, once into a snowdrift that left her gasping and disoriented, but she got back on. Every time. Jack and Pete watched her with something that might have been respect. On the third day, when they finally got the last of the herd into the winter pasture near the ranch, Pete rode up beside her. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Coming from Pete, who'd survived Shiloh and the march to the sea, it was high praise. That night, Eliza could barely climb the ladder to the loft. Every muscle screamed. She collapsed on the mattress still half-dressed, too exhausted to care. She woke hours later to find Caleb sitting on the edge of the loft, holding a tin of liniment. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly. Her first instinct was to refuse, some ingrained sense of propriety from her old life. But that life was 2,000 miles away and might as well have belonged to someone else. "My shoulders," she said. "I can't reach." He helped her sit up and she pulled her shirt down enough to expose her shoulders. His hands were careful, impersonal, working the liniment into the knotted muscles. It burned and soothed at the same time. "You did good out there," he said. "Moving cattle in snow, that's not easy even for men who've been doing it for years." "I fell off my horse. Twice. I know. I was there." She heard the smile in his voice. "But you got back on. That's what matters." When he was done, she expected him to leave. Instead, he sat there in the dim light from the lamp below. "Eliza, we need to talk about something." Her stomach tightened. "All right. We're married legally, but we're still living like—" He stopped, frustrated with his own awkwardness. "What I'm trying to say is, I don't expect anything from you. In that way. Not until you're ready. If you're ever ready. This is a partnership first." She turned to look at him. In the shadows, she could see the scar that ran along his jawline, souvenir from some battle he never talked about. Could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like he was waiting for rejection. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "But Caleb, I need you to understand something. What happened in Boston, what that man did, lying about me, ruining my reputation, it wasn't just about gossip. It was about power. He wanted to control me, and when he couldn't, he destroyed me instead, or tried to. I'm not him. I know that. But trust. That takes time." "I've got time," Caleb said simply. "We both do." After he climbed back down, Eliza lay in the dark and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Safety, maybe. or the beginning of it. The next morning brought a letter. Jack had ridden into town for supplies and came back with mail. 3 letters for Caleb, all ranch business, and 1 for Eliza. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her sister, Margaret. Eliza took the letter outside to read it, standing in the cold with her back against the barn wall. Margaret's words were careful, coded in the way they'd learned growing up in a house where their mother read all their correspondence. The family was well. Father's business was thriving. Margaret herself had become engaged to a banker's son, a suitable match that everyone approved of. And then, buried in the middle of the second page, "Mother asks after you constantly, though she will not say your name. I think she regrets how things ended, though she will never admit it. I miss you terribly. Please write and tell me you are well." Eliza folded the letter and stood there, watching her breath make clouds in the cold air. She'd left Boston with nothing. No money beyond what she'd saved, no references, no family support. Her mother had made that clear. If Eliza insisted on maintaining her innocence, on refusing to apologize for sins she hadn't committed, she was no longer welcome in their home. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," her mother had said. "Just apologize. Tell them you made a mistake. In a year or 2, this will all blow over." But Eliza couldn't do it. Couldn't stand in front of people and confess to something that never happened, just to make them comfortable. So she'd left instead. "Bad news?" She turned to find Caleb standing a few feet away, giving her space but clearly concerned. "My sister, she's getting married." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's safe," Eliza said. "She's doing everything right, marrying the right kind of man, staying in the right kind of society, everything I failed at." Caleb came closer. "You didn't fail. You refused to lie. That's not the same thing. Tell that to my mother. Your mother's not here, and she doesn't get a vote on your life anymore." Eliza looked at him, this man she'd known for barely 2 months, who seemed to understand things about her she hadn't said aloud. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Coming here, marrying you. Maybe I should have just apologized, played their game, waited it out like my mother said." "You think that would have worked?" "Probably not. Men like Jonathan Aldrich, they don't forgive women who reject them. Even if I'd apologized, he would have found other ways to punish me." "So you saved yourself. Nothing wrong with that." She wanted to believe him, but the old voices were loud, her mother's disappointment, the headmistress's cold dismissal, the whispers that had followed her through Boston like smoke. "I'm going to write back to Margaret," she said. "Tell her I'm well, that I'm married, running a ranch." "She won't believe it." "Show her," Caleb said. "When spring comes, when we've got our feet under us, invite her to visit. Let her see for herself." The idea was so unexpected, so generous, that Eliza didn't know what to say. In Boston, her scandal had tainted everyone around her. Friends had abandoned her, afraid of guilt by association. And here was Caleb, offering to bring her family right into their home. "You'd do that? Let her come here?" "She's your sister, and if she's anything like you, I'd probably like her." That night, Eliza wrote to Margaret. Not a long letter, just enough to say she was alive, married, learning to ranch in Wyoming, that she was, against all odds, happy. Or at least happier than she'd been in a long time. She didn't mention the nightmares that still woke her sometimes, the ones where she was back in Boston being torn apart by gossip. Didn't mention the way she still flinched when men spoke to her too familiarly, or how hard it was to accept kindness without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Some things Margaret didn't need to know. November brought more snow and the first real test of their partnership. One of the Sullivan kids, the youngest boy, showed up at the ranch on a half-frozen horse with news that his mother was sick. Bad sick, fever and chills, couldn't keep anything down. "Pa's out with the herd," the boy said, teeth chattering. "Becky's trying to take care of Ma, but she don't know what to do." Eliza looked at Caleb. He nodded. "Go," he said. "Take the wagon, take whatever supplies you need. I'll handle things here." The Sullivan place was 5 miles north, a rough cabin even smaller than theirs with 3 kids and 2 adults somehow making it work. Eliza found Mrs. Sullivan in bed, burning with fever, while her 12-year-old daughter tried to manage the house and 2 younger brothers. Eliza had nursed her fair share of sick girls at the academy, influenza, pneumonia, the usual childhood diseases. She knew fever, knew the thin line between illness that would pass and illness that would kill. Mrs. Sullivan was close to that line. "Becky, I need you to keep the fire going and boil water," Eliza said, rolling up her sleeves. "Tommy, you and your brother need to stay out of this room unless I call you. Understood?" The kids nodded, wide-eyed. For 3 days, Eliza barely left Mrs. Sullivan's side. She forced water and weak broth into the woman, changed sweat-soaked sheets, kept the fever down with cool cloths. The second night was the worst. Mrs. Sullivan's temperature spiked so high she became delirious, thrashing and calling for people who weren't there. Eliza held her down and prayed to whatever was listening that she wasn't about to watch a woman die. Dawn broke on the third day, and the fever finally broke with it. Mrs. Sullivan's eyes opened, clear for the first time in days. Mrs. Rourke?" "Right here," Eliza said, exhausted. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses, but alive." She tried to sit up, failed. "The children?" "Fine. Becky's been a tremendous help. You've raised her well." "Tom? My husband?" "Still out with the herd. The boys sent word. He should be back soon." Mrs. Sullivan's eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life. I helped. You're strong. You did most of the work yourself." But word got around. By the time Eliza made it back to the ranch, half the community knew that Mrs. Rourke had spent 3 days nursing a neighbor through a fever that should have killed her, that she'd left her own warm cabin to sleep on a hard floor in someone else's house, tending to a woman she barely knew. Martha Hendricks stopped by the following week with a dried apple pie and news. "You've made quite an impression," she said, setting the pie on the table. "Folks are talking." Eliza's stomach tightened. "Good talking or bad talking?" "Good, mostly. Though there's some who wonder about a woman who shows up with no family, no references, and a past she won't discuss." There it was. The question Eliza had been waiting for. Martha sat down across from her. "I'm not asking for details, that's between you and Caleb, but I'll tell you what I tell all newcomers. Out here, what you do matters more than what you were. You could have been a duchess or a dance hall girl, and nobody would care as long as you pull your weight and don't make trouble." "And if I was a dance hall girl?" Martha smiled. "Then I'd say you found a better line of work." After she left, Eliza stood at the window and watched the snow fall. She'd spent so much time in Boston worried about reputation, about what people thought, about maintaining appearances. And here was Martha Hendricks, practical as a hammer, telling her none of it mattered. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. Caleb found her there when he came in from checking the stock. "You all right?" "Martha says people are talking about me." "People always talk. Doesn't mean anything." It meant everything in Boston. He hung up his coat, brushed snow from his hair. "This isn't Boston. You keep forgetting that." "Hard to forget when it's the only reference point I have." Caleb came to stand beside her. Outside, the wind was picking up, driving the snow horizontal. "You know what I think? I think you're so used to being judged that you don't know how to stop judging yourself. You made a mistake. Not the one they accused you of, but a different one. You trusted the wrong people. Believed the world was fair. That's not a sin, Eliza. That's just being human." She looked at him. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of watching you punish yourself for other people's failures." That night, they sat by the fire, and Caleb told her about the war. Not the battles, he never talked about those, but the aftermath. The way he'd come back to Ohio to find his parents dead from influenza, his family farm sold for taxes, everything he'd fought for just gone. "I was angry for a long time," he said. "Felt like the world owed me something, like I'd paid my dues and deserved better. Then I realized the world doesn't owe anybody anything. You want something, you build it yourself." "Is that why you came to Wyoming?" "Partly. Also couldn't stand Ohio anymore. Too many ghosts." He stared into the fire. "Out here, I could start fresh. Be somebody new. Or at least try." "And has it worked?" He looked at her. "Starting to." December came in hard and mean, with temperatures that dropped so low the water in the well froze and they had to melt snow for drinking. The cattle huddled together in the lee of the ridge, their breath freezing in clouds around their heads. Jack and Pete took turns riding out every few hours to make sure none of them had wandered off or gotten stuck in drifts. Eliza learned to love the quiet of winter, the way the world contracted to just the ranch, the animals, the work of staying alive. In Boston, she'd always been surrounded by people, students, teachers, society events, church gatherings, the constant noise of civilization. Here, she could hear herself think. She spent the long evenings reading by firelight, working her way through Caleb's small collection of books. He had eclectic taste, Shakespeare and Whitman, alongside farm manuals and books on animal husbandry. She read them all, sometimes aloud when he was doing paperwork at the table. "You've got a good voice for reading," he said one night. "I used to read to my students, the younger girls especially. They love stories." "You miss it? Teaching?" She considered. "I miss the girls. Some of them, anyway. The ones who actually wanted to learn, who saw education as freedom, rather than just something they had to endure before marriage." She set her book down. "But I don't miss the academy. Don't miss having to smile at mothers who looked down on me because I worked for a living. Don't miss pretending to be grateful for a position that paid barely enough to live on." "You could teach here. Not at an academy, but in town. They've been talking about starting a proper school." "Have they?" "Reverend Walsh mentioned it last time I was in town. Said they'd need someone educated, someone patient, someone who knew what they were doing." The idea stirred something in Eliza. Teaching again, but on her own terms. In a community that might actually value education instead of seeing it as social polish for future wives. "I'll think about it," she said. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. Eliza made a venison roast and Caleb surprised her with a new pair of gloves, sturdy leather ones lined with wool. She'd gotten him a book, a new novel by Mark Twain she'd ordered through the trading post. "How'd you pay for this?" he asked, looking at the book with something like wonder. "I've been teaching the Sullivan kids, remember? Their father pays me in eggs and sometimes cash. I saved it. You didn't have to spend it on me." "I wanted to." They sat by the fire that night, comfortable in each other's silence, and Eliza realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this settled, this much like herself. The trouble started in January. A man rode up to the ranch on a gray afternoon when the temperature was hovering around 0. He was well-dressed, riding a good horse, and had the kind of confidence that came from money and privilege. Eliza saw him through the window, and her blood went cold. She knew that posture, that entitled way of sitting in the saddle. Caleb went out to meet him. Eliza stood just inside the door, listening. "Help you?" Caleb asked. "I'm looking for a woman. Eliza Whitmore. I was told she might be here." Eliza's heart hammered. It wasn't Jonathan Aldrich. The voice was wrong, but it was someone from that world, someone who knew her name. "Who's asking?" Caleb's voice had gone flat, careful. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm a lawyer from Boston. I represent the family of Jonathan Aldrich." Everything in Eliza wanted to run, hide, disappear. But she'd spent 2 months learning to stand her ground, and she wasn't about to stop now. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold. "I'm Eliza Whitmore," she said. "Or I was. I'm Eliza Rourke now. What do you want?" Chen's eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "Mrs. Rourke, I apologize for the intrusion. I've been searching for you for several weeks. The matrimonial agency was quite reluctant to give up your location. Good for them. Now, answer my question. What do you want?" He dismounted carefully, keeping his hands visible. Smart man. Caleb had his hand on his hip, near where his gun would be if he were wearing it. "I've come on behalf of Mr. Aldrich's family, specifically his sister, Catherine. She wishes to speak with you about the events of last year. Her brother is a liar and a coward. There's nothing to discuss." "She knows." Eliza stopped. "She knows what?" "That Jonathan lied. That he fabricated the entire affair to save face after you rejected him." Chen reached into his coat slowly and pulled out an envelope. She found letters, evidence that her brother had pursued several other women in similar fashion with similar results. "She's been trying to reach you for months to apologize and to offer restitution." Eliza took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were 3 letters, one from Catherine Aldrich, full of apologies and horror at what her brother had done. One from the headmistress of Beacon Hill Academy, offering her position back with a raise in salary. and one from an attorney representing Catherine, offering a substantial financial settlement if Eliza would sign an agreement not to pursue legal action. This is... Eliza couldn't finish the sentence. Vindication, Chen said quietly. Miss Aldrich wanted you to know that she's made sure everyone in Boston society knows the truth. Your name has been cleared, your reputation restored. You could return tomorrow and take up exactly where you left off. Eliza looked at the letters, at this man who'd ridden hundreds of miles through winter to deliver them, at the life she'd lost being handed back to her like a gift. Then she looked at Caleb, at the ranch behind him, at the mountains in the distance and the endless sky. Tell Catherine Aldrich I appreciate her courage in coming forward, Eliza said slowly. And I appreciate the apology, but I won't be returning to Boston. Chen blinked. Mrs. Rourke, I don't think you understand. You've been fully exonerated. The Academy wants you back. You could have your old life returned. I don't want my old life, Eliza said, and realized as she said it that it was absolutely true. I have a new one, a better one. But the settlement... I'll take it, Caleb said suddenly. Both Eliza and Chen turned to look at him. Not because we need vindication or apologies, but because that money belongs to my wife. What happened to her was wrong, and if that family wants to make it right financially, fine. We'll use it to build something good here. Chen looked between them, clearly baffled by people who would turn down Boston society for a ranch in Wyoming, but he was professional enough to simply nod. Very well. I'll draw up the papers. You'll need to sign them in front of a witness. Reverend Walsh can witness, Caleb said. We'll ride into town tomorrow. After Chen left, Eliza stood in the snow, holding the letters and feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. You didn't have to do that, she said to Caleb. Accept the settlement, I mean. That money is yours by right, and we can use it. Expand the herd, build a better barn, maybe hire another hand for the spring work. He looked at her seriously. But if you want to go back to Boston, if that's what you really want, I won't stop you. I don't want to go back. You sure? That's your whole life there. Your family, your career was my life. Past tense. She looked down at the letters. You know what the worst part of that whole nightmare was? Not the gossip or the lost job or even my mother's rejection. It was the helplessness. The feeling that nothing I said or did mattered, that the truth didn't matter, that I was just this thing being talked about and judged and dismissed. And now I matter. What I do matters. The work I do, the choices I make, the life I'm building, it all matters. How could I give that up to go back to being, what? A school teacher grateful for the privilege of educating rich men's daughters? No, thank you. Caleb smiled, slow and genuine. All right then. We'll take their money and use it to build something they can't touch or take away. That night, lying in the loft, Eliza thought about the strange path her life had taken. 6 months ago, she'd been drowning in scandal and shame, watching everything she'd worked for dissolve. Now she was married to a rancher in Wyoming, legally vindicated but choosing to stay in exile anyway. Her mother would think she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had, or maybe she'd finally found it. The settlement came through in February, a bank draft for more money than Eliza had ever seen in one place. They used part of it to expand the herd, buying 50 head of good breeding stock from a rancher in Montana. The rest went into improvements, a new barn, a chicken coop that didn't leak, proper windows for the cabin. With the money came respect. Other ranchers who'd been polite but distant started seeking Caleb's opinion on stock breeding and land management. Martha Hendricks mentioned again that the town was serious about starting a school, and would Eliza consider being the teacher? We could pay you, Martha said. Not much, but something. And you'd have your own building, your own books, your own say in what gets taught. Eliza looked at Caleb. He nodded. I'll do it, she said. But I have conditions. Name them. I teach all children who want to learn. Rich, poor, boys, girls, doesn't matter. If they can get themselves to the schoolhouse, I'll teach them. Martha smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They broke ground on the schoolhouse in March, as soon as the frost was out of the earth. It was a community effort. Every rancher and farmer for 20 miles contributed labor or materials. The building went up fast. a simple one-room structure with a potbelly stove and windows on 3 sides to let in light. Eliza helped with the construction, swinging a hammer alongside men twice her size. Her hands, already calloused from ranch work, developed new calluses. Her back ached. She'd never been happier. The night before the school was set to open, she couldn't sleep. Caleb found her sitting at the table, staring at her lesson plans. "Nervous?" he asked. "Terrified. What if nobody comes, or what if they come and I'm terrible at this? It's been almost a year since I taught Eliza." He sat down across from her. "You're going to be fine, better than fine. Those kids are lucky to have you." "You don't know that." "I do. I've watched you teach the Sullivan kids. You're patient, you're clear, and you actually care whether they learn. That's more than most teachers have." She wanted to believe him, but the old fears were loud tonight. What if she failed? What if the parents complained? What if her past caught up with her again? "What happened in Boston?" Caleb said, reading her mind. "That's over. You beat it. You won." "Did I? Sometimes it doesn't feel like winning." "You're here, aren't you? Alive, building something real, about to teach kids who actually need education instead of rich girls who just needed polish. That's not winning?" When he put it that way, it sounded different. Sounded like maybe she had won after all, just not in the way she'd expected. Opening day brought 12 students. Ages ranged from 6 to 14, ranch kids mostly, a few from town. They filed in, shy and curious, taking seats at the rough-hewn desks their fathers had built. Eliza stood at the front of the room and felt time fold in on itself. She'd done this before, hundreds of times, but never like this. Never in a building she'd helped build, teaching children who were there because they wanted to be, not because their parents paid tuition. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Mrs. Rourke, and I'm very happy to see you all here." A girl in the front row, maybe 8 years old, raised her hand. "Yes?" "Is it true you came from Boston?" "It is." "Why'd you leave? Boston sounds nice." Eliza smiled. "Boston is nice, but Wyoming is better." Teaching turned out to be harder than Eliza remembered, but in different ways. At Beacon Hill, she taught girls who already knew how to read, who came from homes filled with books and conversation. Here, half her students had never held a pencil before. Some had parents who could barely write their own names, but what they lacked in preparation, they made up for in hunger. These kids wanted to learn, needed to learn, saw education as a way out, or at least a way up. The youngest boy, Tommy Sullivan, struggled with his letters for weeks. Eliza stayed after school with him, going over the alphabet again and again until her patience wore thin and she had to step outside to keep from snapping at him. Caleb found her there one afternoon, leaning against the schoolhouse with her eyes closed. "Rough day?" "I'm a terrible teacher. Tommy still can't remember the difference between B and D, and I've explained it 20 different ways. He's 6 years old and spent the first 6 years of his life never seeing a book. Give him time. I don't know if I have the patience for this." Caleb laughed. "You nursed his mother through a fever that should have killed her. You can handle teaching the kid his letters." He was right, of course. By May, Tommy could read simple sentences, and the look of pride on his face when he read his first full page made every frustrating afternoon worth it. But not everyone was happy about the school. There were ranchers who thought education made kids soft, mothers who needed their daughters at home to help with chores. A few families pulled their children out after the first month. The worst was Samuel Garrett, who owned a spread 10 miles west. He showed up at the ranch one evening in April, looking for a fight. "My boy says you're teaching them about evolution," he said, standing in the yard with his arms crossed. "Teaching them we came from monkeys." Caleb stepped out of the barn. Eliza could see him sizing up the situation, deciding whether this was going to turn ugly. "I'm teaching them basic science," Eliza said carefully. "Biology, geology, natural history. If that conflicts with your beliefs, damn right it conflicts. I didn't send my boy to school to have his head filled with blasphemy." "Then don't send him," Eliza said, her patience snapping. "Pull him out. Let him grow up ignorant if that's what you prefer. But don't come to my school and tell me what I can and can't teach." Garrett's face went red. "You got a mouth on you, woman. And you've got a brain you're apparently not using," Eliza shot back. "Your son is smart, really smart. He could make something of himself if you'd let him. but instead you want to keep him dumb and scared because that's easier than admitting the world is bigger than you thought. Eliza, Caleb said quietly. A warning. But she was done being careful, done biting her tongue to keep men comfortable. No, she said to Caleb. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of people who value ignorance over knowledge, who think education is dangerous because it might make their children ask questions. She turned back to Garrett. If you want to pull your son out of school, that's your right, but don't expect me to apologize for teaching him the truth. Garrett looked at Caleb. You gonna let her talk to me like that? She can talk however she wants, Caleb said. She's not my property. And she's right. If you don't like what she's teaching, pull your kid out. You don't get to come here and dictate her curriculum. Garrett spat in the dirt. This is what happens when you let women get ideas. They forget their place. Her place is wherever she says it is, Caleb said, and there was steel in his voice now. And right now, her place is running the only school for 50 miles. You don't like it, start your own. Garrett left, muttering threats that never materialized. His son stayed in school, though whether that was the boy's choice or his mother's, Eliza never knew. That night, she and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains. The air was warm for the first time in months, carrying the smell of new grass and snowmelt. I shouldn't have lost my temper, Eliza said. Why not? He was being an ass. But now he's angry, and angry men talk. What if other families pull their children? Then those children will grow up ignorant, and it'll be their parents' fault, not yours. Caleb stretched his legs out. You can't make everyone happy, Eliza, especially not out here. People have strong opinions, and they're not shy about sharing them. You start trying to please everyone, you'll drive yourself crazy. I know, it's just... In Boston, I spent so much time trying to be what everyone expected. The perfect teacher, the perfect daughter, the perfect young lady. And it didn't matter. They destroyed me anyway. So stop trying to be perfect. Be yourself. Teach the way you think is right. The families who value education will keep their kids in school. The ones who don't, well, that's their loss. She leaned her head on his shoulder, surprising both of them. He went still for a moment, then carefully put his arm around her. When did you get so wise? She asked. I keep telling you, I'm not wise. I just don't give a damn what Samuel Garrett thinks. Spring brought work, constant, exhausting, necessary work. Caleb and the hired men spent long days mending fence, clearing irrigation ditches, preparing for the spring gather when they'd round up cattle scattered during the winter. Eliza taught 5 days a week and spent her evenings helping with ranch accounts, planning meals, maintaining the garden she'd started near the cabin. The garden was her pride. She'd never grown anything before. In Boston, vegetables came from markets, prepared and clean. Here, she learned to coax life from dirt, planted beans and squash and tomatoes, tended them carefully, watched them grow. When the first tomato ripened in June, she picked it like it was made of gold. Look at this, she said to Caleb that evening, holding it up. I grew this. Me. He smiled. Congratulations, you're officially a rancher's wife. I thought I already was. You were the legal version. Now you're the real version. She threw the tomato at him. He caught it, laughing, and they ate it sliced with salt for dinner, and it was the best thing Eliza had ever tasted. June also brought a letter from Margaret. Her wedding had been lovely, she wrote. The house her new husband had purchased was perfect. Boston society had welcomed her with open arms. Everything was exactly as it should be. Between the lines, Eliza could read her sister's loneliness, the careful performance of happiness, the life lived according to someone else's script. You should write back, Caleb said. Invite her to visit. I meant it when I said that before. She'd never come. Her husband wouldn't allow it. Why not? Because Wyoming is crude and dangerous and I'm technically in exile, even if I've been vindicated. It wouldn't look good. Caleb set down the harness he was mending. Your sister married a man who controls where she can travel? That's how it works in Boston. A woman's reputation depends on her husband's approval. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Eliza laughed. I'm not disagreeing. She wrote back anyway, a warm letter full of details about ranch life, the school, the students. She told Margaret about the garden and the mountains and the impossible expanse of sky. She made Wyoming sound like what it was, hard and beautiful and real. Whether Margaret would ever see it for herself remained an open question. July brought drought. The streams that usually ran full through summer started drying up. The grass turned brown. Cattle grew thin and restless, wandering further in search of water and good grazing. "We need rain," Jack said, staring at the cloudless sky. "Another month of this, and we're in trouble." They weren't the only ones struggling. Other ranches started losing stock to dehydration and heat. The smaller operations, the ones without good water rights, were hit hardest. A few families packed up and left, heading back east or further west to Oregon. Caleb spent long hours riding the fence lines, checking water sources, moving cattle to whatever patches of decent grass remained. He came home exhausted, sunburned, frustrated. "We might lose 20 head, he said one night. "Maybe more if it doesn't rain soon." "What can we do?" "Not much. Wait. Hope. Pray if you're the praying type." Eliza wasn't the praying type, but she understood desperation. Understood the helplessness of watching something you'd built face destruction from forces you couldn't control. She started hauling extra water from the well to the garden, determined to save at least that. The tomatoes, the beans, the squash, they were small victories in a season of losses, and she needed them. The other women noticed. Martha Hendricks stopped by one afternoon and found Eliza carrying buckets from the well, sweat soaking through her dress. "You're going to work yourself to death," Martha said. "Better than watching everything die." "It's a garden, Eliza. You can plant another one next year." "It's not about the garden." Eliza set the buckets down, breathing hard. "It's about having something I can control, something I can actually do. I can't make it rain, can't keep the cattle from dying, can't do anything useful, but I can water these damn vegetables." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up one of the buckets. "All right, show me what needs watering." Other women followed Martha's lead. Mrs. Sullivan came with her daughters. The doctor's wife arrived with her sister. They formed a bucket brigade from the well to the garden, working in the heat without complaint, saving vegetables they'd never eat. It was the first time Eliza understood what Martha had meant months ago about depending on each other. This wasn't charity, it was community. Women helping women because that's what you did when times got hard. When Caleb came home that evening, he found a dozen women in his yard, watering a garden that had grown 3 times larger than it started. "What happened here?" he asked Eliza. "The ladies' social decided to meet at our place," she said, "and to do some gardening while we were at it." He looked at the women, at the saved vegetables, at his wife standing there exhausted and proud, and something in his face shifted. "Thank you, he said to all of them. "This means more than you know." Martha waved him off. "Thank Eliza. She's the one who started it." The rain finally came in August, 3 days of steady downpour that turned the dust to mud and the creeks to torrents. The cattle drank deep and the grass began to recover. They'd lost fewer head than Caleb feared, 15 instead of 20, and the ones that survived were strong enough to make it through. The garden thrived. By late August, Eliza was giving away vegetables to anyone who wanted them, filling baskets with tomatoes and beans and squash. The women who'd helped save it got first pick, and they took the produce with gratitude. "You're going to be canning all winter," Caleb said, watching her load another basket for the Sullivan family. "Good. Gives me something to do when I'm not teaching." He came up behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. They'd been dancing around each other for months now, careful and polite. Partners in every way except the one that mattered. "Eliza," he said quietly. She turned. He was looking at her the way he'd been looking at her for weeks, like he wanted something but was afraid to ask for it. "I know we agreed to take things slow," he said, "and I meant that. I still mean it. But I need you to know, this isn't just a business arrangement for me anymore, hasn't been for a while." Her heart hammered. "What is it then?" "I don't know what to call it. Partnership, maybe. Friendship." He paused. "Something more, if you want it to be." She thought about the nights they'd spent talking by the fire, the easy way they'd learned to work together, the 100 small kindnesses that had built between them. Thought about how safe she felt with him. How known. I want it to be, she said. He kissed her then, careful and sweet, and Eliza felt something in her chest unlock. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it, the possibility. That night, she didn't climb up to the loft. She stayed below, in Caleb's bed, and they learned each other slowly. No rush, no performance, just two people figuring out how to be close after so long being alone. In the morning, she woke to find him watching her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, I'm glad you stayed, that you didn't go back to Boston." "Me too." Fall arrived with its usual chaos of work. The cattle needed to be gathered, sorted, the calves branded, and weaned. Hay had to be cut and stored for winter. Repairs needed to be made before the snow came. Eliza helped where she could, working alongside Caleb and the hired men, her hands growing harder with each passing day. The school year started up again in September with 16 students this time. Word had spread about the quality of teaching, and families were willing to send their children further to attend. Eliza taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, basic science. She pushed her students hard but fairly, and they responded by working harder than they thought they could. One afternoon in October, Tommy Sullivan read an entire chapter from a novel without help. The other students applauded, and Tommy's face went red with pride. After class, he lingered by Eliza's desk. "Ma says you saved her life," he said. "Your mother is strong. She saved herself." "But you helped, and you taught me to read." He scuffed his boot against the floor. "I wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me even when I was slow." Eliza's throat tightened. "You were never slow, Tommy. You just needed time." After he left, she sat at her desk and let herself feel it, the satisfaction of doing work that mattered, of helping someone become more than they thought they could be. This was better than Beacon Hill, better than any position she could have had in Boston, because here, her work actually changed lives. November brought the first serious snow and news that rocked the community. Samuel Garrett, the rancher who'd complained about the school, had died suddenly. Heart failure, the doctor said. Left behind a widow and 4 children, including the smart boy who'd stayed in Eliza's class despite his father's objections. The funeral was well attended. Eliza went, standing in the back of the church, listening to Reverend Walsh say kind things about a man who'd been neither particularly kind nor particularly cruel. Just another rancher trying to survive Wyoming. After the service, Mrs. Garrett approached her. "I want to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For standing up to Sam. For teaching Daniel anyway." She glanced at her son, who stood with his siblings looking lost. Sam was a good man in many ways, but he was afraid of anything he didn't understand, including education. Daniel's going to need that education now. He's the man of the family. The boy was 12 years old. "How will you manage the ranch?" Eliza asked. "Don't know yet. Sam's brother might take us in, or we might try to run it ourselves." Mrs. Garrett straightened her shoulders. "We'll figure something out. We always do." Walking back to the wagon, Caleb said, "That could have been any of us. Heart gives out, accident happens, and everything changes." That's a cheerful thought. Not cheerful, realistic. He helped her up to the wagon seat. "Which is why we need to make plans, legal plans. If something happens to me, the ranch needs to be secure for you. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that, and I need to know you'd be protected." He looked at her seriously. "I'm going to have papers drawn up. Full ownership transfer to you if I die. No questions, no complications. The ranch is yours." "Caleb, I mean it, Eliza. You've earned this place as much as I have. More, maybe. I'm not leaving you vulnerable." She thought about Mrs. Garrett, widowed and uncertain, dependent on the charity of in-laws who might or might not help. Thought about how precarious women's positions were, how quickly security could evaporate. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Nothing to thank me for. It's just practical. But it was more than practical. It was trust. It was commitment. It was Caleb saying, in the only way he knew how, that he saw her as an equal partner in every sense. Winter set in hard and cold. The ranch settled into its familiar rhythm, feeding cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, keeping the fires burning. Eliza taught school 4 days a week, canceling on the fifth when the weather was too dangerous for students to travel. The evenings grew longer, darker. She and Caleb spent them reading, talking, planning for spring. They decided to expand the operation, buy more land if any became available, maybe hire a permanent hand instead of just seasonal help. "We could build a bigger house," Caleb said one night. "Something with separate rooms, a real kitchen. Maybe a room for guests if your sister ever decides to visit." "That would be nice." "Or a nursery," he said carefully, "if that's something you want." Eliza set down her book. They hadn't talked about children, hadn't even approached the subject. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. "I don't know if I'd be a good mother," she said honestly. "Why not?" "Because I had a terrible example. My mother was cold, critical, more concerned with appearances than with actually raising her daughters. I'm afraid I'd be like her." "You're nothing like her," Caleb said firmly. "Look at how you are with your students. Patient, kind, demanding, but fair. That's what good parenting looks like. Teaching isn't the same as motherhood. It's closer than you think." She thought about it over the next few weeks, watching the way mothers interacted with their children at school, seeing the balance between affection and discipline, protection and independence. Thought about whether she had the capacity for that kind of love. The answer came in December, sudden and certain and terrifying. She'd been feeling off for a few days, nauseous in the mornings, exhausted by evening. She blamed it on winter illness, the endless gray days, too much time indoors. But when she missed her monthly cycle, the truth became unavoidable. She was pregnant. Eliza sat in the loft, hand on her belly, feeling the weight of it. A child. Growing inside her. A whole new person who would depend on her for everything. The fear was immediate and overwhelming. What if she failed? What if she was a terrible mother? What if something went wrong with the pregnancy, with the birth? Women died in childbirth out here. She'd seen it happen, watched families torn apart by losses that might have been prevented in a city hospital. But underneath the fear was something else, something unexpected. Hope. She climbed down from the loft to find Caleb stoking the fire. "I need to tell you something," she said. He turned, saw her face, and went still. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think so." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen on him. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "This is good, right?" he asked, pulling back to look at her. "You're happy about this?" "I'm terrified about this," she admitted. "But yes, I think I'm happy too." They rode into town the next day to see the doctor. He confirmed what Eliza already knew. She was about 2 months along, due in late spring or early summer. Everything looked normal, healthy. He gave her instructions about diet and rest and told her to come back monthly for checkups. Walking out of the doctor's office, Eliza felt the reality of it hit her. This was happening. She was going to be a mother. "We should tell people," Caleb said. "Get the word out so folks know to help if you need it." "Not yet. Not until I'm further along. Things can go wrong in the first few months." He nodded, understanding. They'd both seen enough loss to know that hope had to be tempered with caution. But word got out anyway. Small towns being what they were, the doctor's wife mentioned to Martha Hendricks that Eliza had been in for a visit, and Martha put 2 and 2 together. By the end of the week, half the territory knew that Mrs. Rourke was expecting. The response surprised Eliza. Women she barely knew stopped by with advice, hand-me-down baby clothes, offers of help. Mrs. Sullivan brought a cradle her children had outgrown. Martha delivered a stack of cloth diapers and a knowing smile. "This is what community does," she said. "We take care of our own." Eliza had never been good at accepting help, but pregnancy left her no choice. By January, she was showing enough that climbing into the wagon required Caleb's assistance, and the exhaustion hit her in waves that made teaching a full day nearly impossible. She cut back to 3 days a week, hating the necessity but knowing her limits. The students noticed. Tommy Sullivan asked one day if she was sick, his face scrunched with worry. "Not sick," she said. "Just growing a baby. It takes a lot of energy." Oh, he thought about that. Is that why Mrs. Fletcher sleeps all the time? She's got a baby coming, too. Probably, Eliza said, amused. Growing people is hard work. What she didn't tell the students was that the pregnancy terrified her more than she'd admitted to Caleb. The morning sickness lasted well into the afternoon. Her back ached constantly, and underneath all the physical discomfort was the gnawing fear that something would go wrong, that she'd lose the baby, or worse, that the birth would kill her the way it had killed women throughout history. She'd seen it happen once in Boston. A student's mother, young and healthy, had died 3 days after delivering a son. The infection had spread fast, and there was nothing the doctors could do. Eliza remembered the funeral, the crying children, the father's empty eyes. "You're worrying again," Caleb said one night, watching her stare into the fire. "How can you tell? You get this look, like you're working through all the worst possibilities." She didn't deny it. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it. But worrying about it now won't change anything. That's easy to say when you're not the one who has to actually give birth. He was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I can't understand what that feels like. But I can tell you that you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can do this, you can." Women die, Caleb. Strong women, smart women. Women who do everything right and still die because their bodies betray them. I know. His voice was steady, serious. And I'm scared too. But being scared doesn't help either of us. So instead of worrying about what might happen, let's focus on what we can control. You see the doctor regularly. You rest when you need to. You let people help you. That's all we can do. It was practical advice, vintage Caleb, but it helped. Eliza let herself lean into his steadiness, using it to anchor herself when the fear got too loud. February brought a blizzard that shut down the school for 2 weeks. The snow piled so high against the cabin that Caleb had to dig a tunnel just to reach the barn. The cattle huddled together for warmth, and the men took turns breaking ice on the water troughs every few hours. Eliza spent the days reading, sewing baby clothes, trying to imagine what life would be like with a child. She'd made a list of names, crossed most of them out, made new lists. Nothing felt right. "What if we wait until we meet the baby?" Caleb suggested. "See what fits." "What if the baby is born and we still can't agree? Then we'll call it kid until something sticks." She threw a sock at him. He caught it, grinning, and the moment of lightness felt like a gift. When the snow finally cleared and school resumed, Eliza noticed that one of her students was missing. Sarah Garrett, Samuel Garrett's daughter. The girl had been coming regularly since her father's death, eager to learn in a way she'd never been when he was alive. "Anyone know where Sarah is?" Eliza asked the class. Tommy raised his hand. "Mrs. Garrett took the kids to live with Mr. Garrett's brother, out near Laramie. Ma says they left last week." Eliza felt a stab of disappointment. Sarah had been bright, curious, full of questions. Now she'd be stuck on another ranch with an uncle who probably shared Samuel Garrett's views on education. "That's too bad," she said quietly. After school, she mentioned it to Caleb. Another one lost. Another girl who won't get the education she deserves because men like Samuel Garrett think learning makes women dangerous. "You can't save everyone," Caleb said. "I know, but I hate it anyway." He pulled her close, one hand resting on her growing belly. "You've already saved more kids than you realize. Tommy can read now. Daniel Garrett got 2 years of real education before his mother moved. The Fletcher girls know their numbers. That's not nothing, Eliza. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But you keep doing it anyway. That's what matters." March came in wet and cold, the snow turning to slush that made every road a muddy nightmare. Caleb started building the addition onto the cabin. 2 new rooms, one for the baby and one for them. Proper bedrooms with real doors and windows that opened. The work was slow, hampered by weather and the demands of ranching. But gradually the frame went up, and Eliza could see the shape of their future home taking form. Jack and Pete helped when they could, and a few neighboring ranchers donated materials or labor. "You've made friends here," Caleb observed, watching 3 men work on the roof while their wives kept Eliza company in the cabin. "They're your friends," she said. "They're our friends. They're here because they like you, because they respect what you're doing with the school, because you proved yourself. Eliza looked out at the community that had formed around her without her quite realizing it. Women who brought food and baby clothes, men who helped build their house, children who worked hard because she'd convinced them they could. This was what belonging felt like. Not the forced intimacy of Boston society where relationships were transactional and reputation mattered more than character, but real belonging earned through work and honesty and showing up when things got hard. The baby kicked for the first time in April, a flutter so light Eliza almost missed it. Then it happened again, stronger, and she gasped. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, immediately alert. "Nothing. The baby's moving." He put his hand on her belly, waiting. The baby kicked again, and his face split into a grin. "Strong kid," he said. "Takes after its mother," Eliza replied, and meant it. April also brought a letter from Margaret, longer than usual and written in a hand that shook. Her husband had lost a significant amount of money in a bad business deal. They were selling the house, moving to something smaller. Margaret's tone was careful, controlled, but Eliza could read between the lines. Her sister was scared. "I should send her money," Eliza said. "From the settlement. She's my sister." Caleb considered. "How much do you trust her husband?" "I don't know him well enough to say." "Then be careful. Send it to her directly if you can, not through him. And make it clear it's for her, not to cover his debts." Eliza wrote to Margaret that week, enclosing a bank draft for a substantial sum. Enough to help, but not so much that it would cripple their own finances. She worded the letter carefully, making it clear the money was a gift for Margaret personally, not a loan to be repaid or funds to bail out her husband. Margaret's response came 3 weeks later, tear-stained and grateful. The money had allowed her to keep some independence, to have something of her own in case things got worse. She wrote about how trapped she felt, how her husband made all decisions without consulting her, how different her life was from the dreams she'd had as a girl. Reading it, Eliza felt a complicated mix of sympathy and gratitude. Sympathy for Margaret's situation, but gratitude that she'd escaped a similar fate. If things had gone differently in Boston, if she'd swallowed her pride and married some suitable man to restore her reputation, she might have ended up just as trapped. "Your sister sounds miserable, Caleb said when Eliza read him excerpts. "She is. But she made her choices, just like I made mine. You think she regrets them?" "I think she's realizing there are different kinds of ruin. She avoided the scandal, kept her reputation intact, married well, but she's trapped in a marriage to a man who sees her as property. I lost my reputation but gained my freedom. I'm not sure which of us got the better deal." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You did, no question." By May, Eliza was too pregnant to ride comfortably or stand for long periods. She stopped teaching, turning the school over to a young woman from town who'd been helping as an assistant. It felt like giving up, like admitting defeat, but her body gave her no choice. The baby was due in June, and every day felt like a countdown. Eliza's back ached constantly. She couldn't sleep lying down and spent nights propped up on pillows, dozing fitfully. Her ankles swelled. She was hot all the time, even when everyone else was cold. "I'm never doing this again," she told Martha Hendricks, who'd stopped by with soup. Martha laughed. "That's what they all say. Then you hold the baby and forget how miserable you were." "I will not forget. I'm writing it down so future me remembers." "Won't matter. You'll do it anyway if you want another." Eliza couldn't imagine wanting another, couldn't imagine surviving this one, honestly, but she kept those fears to herself. Martha had birthed 4 children and seemed to think pregnancy was no big deal. Eliza didn't want to sound weak. Caleb finished the addition in late May, just in time. The new bedroom had a real bed frame he'd built himself, a chest of drawers, and windows that let in the morning light. The nursery was smaller, just big enough for a cradle and a rocking chair, but it was theirs. "What do you think?" he asked, watching Eliza walk slowly through the new rooms. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. "You did good work." "We did good work. This is for both of us, for all 3 of us." The labor started on June 10th, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Eliza woke at dawn with a pain low in her back that she initially blamed on sleeping wrong. But then it came again, rhythmic and building, and she knew. "Caleb," she said, shaking him awake, "it's time." He was up instantly, pulling on pants, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. "I'll get the doctor. Martha said she'd help." "Get them both. And Caleb?" She grabbed his hand. "Don't leave me alone." "I won't. Pete can get the doctor. I'm staying right here." The next hours blurred together in waves of pain and effort. Martha arrived first, took one look at Eliza, and started barking orders. Caleb boiled water, gathered clean cloths, did whatever Martha told him to do. The doctor came around noon, examined Eliza, and pronounced everything progressing normally. "Could be hours yet," he said. "First babies take their time." He was right. The labor went on through the afternoon and into the evening, each contraction building on the last until Eliza couldn't remember what it felt like not to hurt. She gripped Caleb's hand so hard she thought she might break it, but he never pulled away. "You're doing fine," he kept saying. "You're doing great." "I'm dying," she gasped between contractions. "You're not dying. You're having a baby." "Same thing." Martha laughed. "She's got spirit. That'll help." When the sun set and the pain reached a pitch Eliza couldn't bear, she screamed, loud and long and without shame. Let the whole territory hear. Let them know what women went through to bring life into the world. And then, finally, impossibly, the doctor said, "One more push." Eliza pushed with everything she had left, and the baby came in a rush of blood and fluid and relief so intense she sobbed. "It's a girl," the doctor said, holding up a tiny, squalling thing covered in vernix. "A healthy girl." He cleaned the baby quickly and placed her on Eliza's chest. The infant was red-faced and furious, crying with impressive volume, but when Eliza touched her cheek, the crying stopped. The baby turned her head, seeking, and Eliza felt her heart crack open. "Hi," she whispered. "I'm your mother." "Sorry about the screaming." Caleb was crying. She'd never seen him cry before, but tears were streaming down his face as he looked at their daughter. "She's perfect," he said. "She's loud," Eliza corrected, but she was smiling. Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the exhaustion, she was smiling. They named her Charlotte after Caleb's mother. Charlotte Rourke, born June 10th in a cabin in Wyoming, welcomed into a world that hadn't expected her but would love her anyway. The first weeks were brutal. Charlotte cried constantly, ate constantly, slept only in fitful bursts. Eliza was exhausted beyond anything she'd experienced, functioning on maybe 3 hours of sleep total per day. Her body ached from the birth. Nursing hurt. Everything hurt. "I don't know what I'm doing," she told Caleb one night, holding a screaming Charlotte and trying not to cry herself. "I can't make her stop. I've fed her, changed her, rocked her. Nothing works." "Give her to me," Caleb said. He took the baby, walked to the window, and started talking to her in a low voice about the ranch, the cattle, the mountains. Charlotte quieted almost immediately, looking up at him with wide, unfocused eyes. "How did you do that?" "No idea. Maybe she just needed a different voice." Eliza watched her husband walk their daughter around the cabin, pointing out things she couldn't possibly see or understand, and felt something settle in her chest. They were going to be all right. Maybe not perfect, maybe not graceful, but all right. Martha and the other women were invaluable those first weeks. They brought food, helped with laundry, took Charlotte for short periods so Eliza could sleep. Mrs. Sullivan taught her tricks for soothing a fussy baby. The doctor's wife showed her better nursing positions. "It takes a village," Martha said. "Always has, always will." By July, Eliza had found something resembling a rhythm. Charlotte was eating better, sleeping in slightly longer stretches. Eliza's body was healing. She could walk without pain, could think about something other than immediate survival. The school was scheduled to reopen in September, and the young woman who'd been teaching sent word that she'd accepted a position in Cheyenne. They needed a teacher again. "I can do it," Eliza told Caleb. "Charlotte will be 3 months old by then. Martha said she'd watch her during school hours." "You sure? That's a lot." "I'm sure. I miss teaching, and we could use the income, especially now that there's 3 of us." The ranch was doing well. The cattle had multiplied. The new land they'd purchased was good grazing. But extra money never hurt. and Eliza needed something that was hers, something beyond motherhood and ranch work. August brought unexpected visitors. A wagon pulled up to the ranch on a hot afternoon, and a woman Eliza hadn't seen in over a year stepped down. Margaret. She looked thinner than Eliza remembered, older. Her dress was expensive but worn, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Hello, Eliza," she said uncertainly. Eliza stood frozen, Charlotte sleeping in her arms. Of all the people she'd expected to see, her sister was last on the list. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" "I left him, my husband. The marriage is over." Margaret's voice shook. "I didn't know where else to go. I know I have no right to ask, but—" "Come inside," Eliza said, cutting her off. "We'll talk." Over tea, Margaret told the whole story. Her husband's debts had grown worse. He'd started drinking, gambling, making increasingly desperate business decisions. When she'd questioned him, he'd struck her, just once, but it was enough. "I took what money I had, including what you sent me, and left," Margaret said. "Got on a train and just kept going until I reached Wyoming. I didn't plan it, I couldn't stay." Eliza looked at her sister, seeing the fear and shame she knew too well. Seeing herself 2 years ago, stepping off a stagecoach with nothing but a carpet bag and hope. "You can stay," she said, "as long as you need. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. Your family." Caleb came in from the barn and took the situation in at a glance. "You must be Margaret," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome. We've got plenty of room." Margaret stared at him, then at Eliza, then at the baby, then around the cabin with its rough-hewn walls and simple furnishings. "This is so different from what I imagined." "Different bad or different good?" Eliza asked. "Just different." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry for everything, for not defending you in Boston, for not believing you, for choosing safety over loyalty. I was a coward." "You were scared? There's a difference." "Is there? You weren't a coward. You told the truth even when it cost you everything." Eliza shifted Charlotte to her other arm. "And look where it got me. Exiled to Wyoming, married to a rancher, teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, living in a cabin I helped build with my own hands." She smiled. "Best decision I ever made." Margaret laughed through her tears. "You're happy. Actually happy." "Most days, yes. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But it's mine. I chose this. That makes all the difference." That evening, they set up a bed for Margaret in the main room. Charlotte woke crying around midnight, and Eliza stumbled out to feed her, exhausted. She found Margaret sitting at the table, unable to sleep. "I forgot how loud babies are," Margaret said. "She's getting better. You should have heard her a month ago." Margaret watched Eliza nurse Charlotte, something like wonder on her face. "You're good at this. Motherhood. I'm surviving it. That's not the same thing. It's more than I could do. You don't know that. You've never tried." They sat in the quiet darkness, sisters separated by years and choices, but connected by blood and now by shared experience, both of them refugees from the lives they'd been expected to lead. "What will you do?" Eliza asked. "Long term?" "I don't know. I have some money left. Maybe I could find work in town, or—" Margaret hesitated. "The school. You said you need help. Could I assist? I'm not trained as a teacher, but I'm educated. I could learn." Eliza considered. Margaret had always been good with children, patient and kind, and having help at the school would make managing both teaching and motherhood easier. "We'd have to see if you're any good at it," Eliza said. "But yes, we could try." Margaret's face lit up. "Really? You'd trust me with that?" "You're my sister, and you need a fresh start just like I did. Why shouldn't you have one?" By September, they'd settled into a new routine. Eliza taught 3 days a week with Margaret assisting. The other 2 days, Margaret took over entirely while Eliza handled ranch business and Charlotte. Martha and other women in town took turns watching the baby during school hours. The students loved Margaret. She was gentler than Eliza, more patient with the slower learners. Together, they made a good team, Eliza pushing students to excel, Margaret supporting those who struggled. The town accepted Margaret without much fuss. A few people asked questions about her husband, but the answer, they separated, was enough. Women understood. Out here, you didn't pry into why someone had left their past behind. Charlotte grew fat and happy, passed between a dozen willing hands during the day, always returning to Eliza's arms at night. She smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 8, and by 4 months was the acknowledged darling of Clearwater Station. "That baby's going to be spoiled rotten," Caleb said, watching Mrs. Sullivan coo over Charlotte at church. "Too late. She already is," Eliza replied. But she didn't mind. Charlotte was loved, safe, surrounded by community. What more could any mother want? October brought the fall gather, the final push to prepare for winter. Caleb and the hired men spent long days on horseback, and Eliza juggled teaching, motherhood, and helping Margaret settle into Wyoming life. One evening, Margaret asked the question Eliza had been waiting for. "Do you ever miss it, Boston?" Eliza thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I miss my students from Beacon Hill, a few of them, anyway. And I miss the ocean. You can't see it from here, but I grew up with it. The smell of salt air, the sound of waves. But not the rest? Not the rest, not the gossip, not the judgment, not the constant performance of being someone acceptable, not the way every action was measured against what society expected." She looked at Margaret. "Do you miss it?" "I miss the opera, good bookstores, being able to buy decent fabric." Margaret smiled. "But I don't miss being married to Robert. Don't miss walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing and set him off. Don't miss being decoration instead of a person." "Think you'll ever marry again?" "I don't know. Maybe. But only if I find someone who sees me as an equal partner, like Caleb sees you." Eliza glanced at her husband, who was outside splitting wood in the fading light. "He does, doesn't he? Took me a while to believe it, but he actually does." "You're lucky," Margaret said quietly. "Not luck. Choice. I chose him. He chose me. We keep choosing each other every day." November came with early snow and a letter that made Eliza's hands shake. It was from Catherine Aldrich, Jonathan's sister, the woman who'd exposed her brother's lies and forced the settlement. The letter was brief. Jonathan had died. Pneumonia, quick and brutal. Catherine thought Eliza should know, not out of expectation for grief, but simply as closure. Eliza read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. But all she felt was a vague sadness for a life wasted on cruelty and pride. "He's dead," she told Caleb that night. "The man who lied about you?" "Yes, pneumonia." "How do you feel?" "Tired, like I've been carrying something heavy and just realized I can set it down." She folded the letter carefully. "He ruined my life in Boston, destroyed my reputation, cost me my career, turned my own mother against me. And now he's just gone. And I'm here, alive, with a family and work I love. He lost. I won." Caleb pulled her close. "You did win. Never doubt that." That winter was easier than the previous ones. The expanded house meant more space and comfort. Charlotte was thriving, growing stronger every day. The cattle were healthy, the ranch was profitable, and the school was full with nearly 20 students. Eliza and Margaret worked well together, their different teaching styles complementing each other. Margaret had found her place in Wyoming, carving out a life that was smaller than what she'd left, but infinitely more free. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the cabin: Caleb, Eliza, Charlotte, Margaret, Jack, and Pete. Martha Hendricks stopped by with pie. The Sullivan family came for dinner. The cabin was crowded, warm, full of voices and laughter. Eliza stood at the window with Charlotte in her arms, looking out at the snow-covered land that had become home. 2 years ago, she'd stepped off a stagecoach with nothing. Now she had everything that mattered. "You're thinking too much again," Caleb said, coming up beside her. "Just remembering where I was, where I am now. And I'd do it all again. Every hard choice, every risk, every moment of fear, because it led here." He kissed her temple. "Merry Christmas, Eliza." "Merry Christmas." Charlotte made a small sound, not quite a word, but close. Soon she'd be talking, walking, becoming a person with opinions and dreams. Eliza would teach her to read, to think, to question, would raise her to be strong and independent, to never let anyone make her small. The future stretched out ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. They'd survived winter and drought, scandal and loss. Had built something real from nothing but will and work and trust. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. That was enough. That was everything. Spring came late that year, the snow refusing to melt until well into April. But when it finally broke, the world turned green overnight, and Charlotte took her first steps in the muddy yard while Eliza watched with her heart in her throat. "She's going to fall," Margaret said, hovering nearby. "Let her fall. She needs to learn." Charlotte stumbled, landed hard on her bottom, and immediately pulled herself back up. Determined, just like her mother. She made it 3 more steps before collapsing into Caleb's waiting arms, shrieking with laughter. "That's my girl," he said, swinging her up, tough as nails. Eliza felt the familiar tug of watching her daughter grow. Charlotte was 10 months old now, changing so fast that sometimes Eliza mourned the tiny infant she'd been. But there was joy in the growth, too, in seeing this small person develop opinions and preferences and a will of her own. The school year was winding down, and Eliza had decisions to make. The town council had approached her about expanding the school, hiring another teacher so they could accommodate more students and offer more advanced coursework. They had the money now. Ranching was good. The town was growing, and families were willing to invest in education. "They want you to be headmistress," Margaret said, reading the official letter. "Oversee the whole operation, hire teachers, design curriculum. That's a real position, Eliza. It's also more responsibility, more time away from Charlotte. Charlotte has a dozen people who love her and want to help. You can't put your life on hold just because you're a mother." Eliza knew Margaret was right, but the guilt was real. She'd fought so hard to be more than someone's wife, more than a scandal, more than the roles society tried to force on her. But now that she had Charlotte, part of her wanted to disappear into motherhood, to make that her entire world. "What do you want?" Caleb asked that night, cutting through her circular thinking the way he always did. "I want both. I want to be a good mother and do meaningful work. Why does it have to be one or the other?" "It doesn't. You're already doing both. The question is whether you want to do more of the work part. And that's allowed, by the way. Wanting things for yourself beyond your kid." She looked at him. "Your mother died when you were young. Do you wish she'd done less? Been home more?" He considered carefully. "I wish she'd lived, period. But no, I don't wish she'd done less. She was a midwife, helped bring half the babies in our county into the world. People loved her, needed her, and I was proud of that even as a kid. Proud that my mother mattered beyond just our family. Charlotte might not see it that way. Like, Charlotte will see what you show her. If you show her a mother who's afraid to want things, who makes herself small to fit someone else's idea of what mothers should be, that's what she'll learn. If you show her a mother who works hard, contributes to her community, and loves her family, that's what she'll become." Eliza took the position. The town council was thrilled. They allocated funds for a second building, hired 2 additional teachers, and gave Eliza authority to structure the school however she saw fit. She designed a curriculum that went beyond basic literacy, adding history, science, practical mathematics, and critical thinking. "You're creating something special here," Margaret said, looking over the plans. "This isn't just a frontier school anymore. This is real education." That's the point. These kids deserve the same opportunities as children in Boston or New York. Just because we're in Wyoming doesn't mean they should settle for less. The expansion brought challenges. Not everyone agreed with Eliza's vision. Some parents thought science was dangerous, history was boring, and girls didn't need education beyond basic housekeeping skills. A few pulled their children out, muttering about uppity Eastern women who thought they knew better. But most families supported her. They saw their children learning, growing, becoming confident in their abilities. They saw daughters doing mathematics and sons reading literature. They saw possibility. One afternoon in May, a man showed up at the school just as classes were ending. He was well-dressed, carried himself with authority, and had the look of someone used to getting his way. Eliza recognized the type immediately. She'd dealt with enough of them in Boston. "Mrs. Rourke, I'm Henry Blackwell. I'm with the Territorial Education Board." Eliza's stomach tightened. The territorial board had oversight of all schools in Wyoming. A visit from them could mean trouble. Mr. Blackwell, what can I do for you? I've been hearing interesting things about your school. Thought I'd come see for myself. He looked around the classroom, at the books lining the shelves, the maps on the walls, the science equipment Eliza had ordered from Chicago. This is quite impressive. Thank you. I've reviewed your curriculum. It's ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for a frontier community. Here it was, the criticism, the pushback, the man explaining to her why she needed to lower her standards. With respect, Mr. Blackwell, I disagree. These children are every bit as capable as children anywhere else. They deserve a rigorous education. I'm not questioning their capability. I'm questioning whether this community can sustain such a program, whether you're setting expectations that can't be met. Eliza felt anger rise in her chest, hot and familiar. I've been running this school for over a year. Enrollment has doubled. Test scores, yes, we test our students, are excellent. Parents are satisfied. Children are learning. What exactly is the problem? Blackwell's expression shifted, surprise replacing condescension. No problem, Mrs. Rourke, quite the opposite. I'm here to ask if you'd be willing to serve as a model for other schools in the territory. Your methods, your curriculum, we'd like to see them replicated. Eliza blinked. You want to copy what I'm doing? With your permission, yes. We've been struggling to establish quality education across Wyoming. Most schools barely teach reading and basic arithmetic. What you've built here is exceptional. The territory would benefit from your expertise. It was the last thing Eliza had expected. Recognition, respect, validation from the very establishment she'd thought would fight her every step. I'd be honored, she said carefully, but I have conditions. Of course you do. Blackwell smiled slightly. Name them. Any school using my curriculum must be open to all students regardless of gender or family wealth. No segregation, no exclusions. Education is a right, not a privilege. Agreed. What else? Teachers must be paid fairly, not token wages, but real compensation that recognizes their professional value. That may be harder to implement, but I'll advocate for it. Anything else? Eliza thought about all the teachers she'd known in Boston. Women with brilliant minds who were paid barely enough to live on, who were dismissed as glorified babysitters. Thought about the students she'd taught who were denied opportunities because of their gender or social class. Support for teacher training. Most people teaching out here have no formal education themselves. We need programs to help them improve, to give them the tools to do this work well. Blackwell extended his hand. You have a deal, Mrs. Rourke. I'll draw up the paperwork. After he left, Eliza stood in the empty classroom and let herself feel it. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, purpose. The sense that she was building something that would outlast her, that would change lives beyond the ones she could personally touch. Margaret found her there an hour later, still standing in the quiet. You all right? The Territorial Education Board wants to use my curriculum across Wyoming, wants me to help train other teachers. Margaret's eyes widened. Eliza, that's incredible. It's terrifying. What if I fail? What if my methods don't work elsewhere? What if... Stop, Margaret said firmly. You've earned this. You've proven yourself. Stop waiting for permission to be good at what you do. That night, Eliza told Caleb about the meeting. He listened carefully, then pulled her close. I'm proud of you, he said simply. I haven't done anything yet. You've done everything. You came here with nothing, built a life, created a school that actually matters, and now you're going to help build more. That's not nothing, Eliza. That's legacy. Legacy. The word stuck with her. She'd spent so long running from her past, from the ruins of her Boston life, that she hadn't thought about what she was running toward. But this was it. This was the future she was building, brick by brick, student by student. Summer brought its own challenges. Charlotte was walking now, getting into everything, requiring constant vigilance. The ranch needed attention. They were expanding the herd again, building new corrals, hiring additional hands. And Eliza was traveling to other communities, helping establish schools, training teachers, spreading the model she'd built in Clearwater Station. It was exhausting. There weren't enough hours in the day. Eliza found herself torn between competing demands, guilty about the time she spent away from Charlotte, anxious about the ranch, worried about the schools she was trying to help establish. "You're doing too much, Yen," Caleb said one evening, watching her fall asleep over paperwork. "I'm doing what needs to be done." "At what cost? You're running yourself into the ground." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're exhausted. When was the last time you slept a full night?" Eliza couldn't remember. Between Charlotte waking, ranch business, and her work with the territorial board, sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. "Something has to give," Caleb said gently. "You can't be everything to everyone all the time." "Why not? You manage the ranch, help with Charlotte, support my work, and I'm tired too," he admitted. "This is hard, Eliza. Building something meaningful is always hard. But we need to be smart about it, pace ourselves, ask for help when we need it." He was right, of course. Eliza had spent so long being self-sufficient, proving she didn't need anyone, that she'd forgotten how to accept support. "What do you suggest?" "Hire someone to help with Charlotte during the day. Not just watching her, but actually caring for her. Give yourself permission to focus on the work you're good at without feeling guilty." "That feels like giving up." "It's not giving up, it's being practical. You're trying to revolutionize education in Wyoming. That's important work, but you can't do it if you're too exhausted to think straight." They hired a young woman named Anna, daughter of one of the ranchers, to help with Charlotte and basic household tasks. It felt strange at first, having someone else in the cabin, sharing the work that Eliza had always done herself. But gradually, she adjusted, learned to trust Anna with Charlotte, learned that delegation wasn't weakness. With more time and energy, Eliza threw herself into the territorial education project. She developed detailed curriculum guides, wrote training materials for new teachers, visited schools across Wyoming to observe and advise. Some places welcomed her expertise. Others resented an outsider telling them how to teach. In August, she visited a school in a mining town 50 miles south. The teacher was a man in his 60s who'd been teaching the same way for 30 years. He listened to Eliza's suggestions with barely concealed contempt. "With all due respect, Mrs. Rourke, I've been doing this since before you were born. I don't need some Eastern lady telling me how to manage my classroom. I'm not telling you how to manage your classroom. I'm offering methods that have proven effective." "Effective for what? Turning ranch kids into soft city folk who think they're too good for honest work?" Eliza felt the old anger rise. Education doesn't make people soft. It makes them capable. It gives them choices. Some of your students might want to be ranchers or miners, and that's fine. But some might want to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. Why should they be denied that opportunity because you're too stubborn to try something new? The teacher's face went red. "You've got a lot of nerve. I've got a lot of experience," Eliza shot back. "I've taught in elite academies and frontier schools. I've worked with students from every background imaginable. And I'm telling you that your students deserve better than what you're giving them." She left without changing his mind, angry and frustrated. But 2 weeks later, she got a letter from the mining town. The teacher had retired. The community wanted to know if Eliza could help them find a replacement and implement her curriculum. Small victories. That's what this work was built on. Slow change. One school at a time, one teacher at a time, one student at a time. By fall, Charlotte was talking in full sentences and had opinions about everything. She demanded to help with ranch work, insisted on feeding the chickens herself, threw spectacular tantrums when told no. She was exhausting and delightful in equal measure. "She's exactly like you, Etty," Caleb said one evening, watching Charlotte argue with Margaret about bedtime. "I was never that stubborn." "You absolutely were, still are." Eliza couldn't really argue with that. The school year started with 32 students and 3 teachers. Eliza spent mornings at the school, afternoons on ranch business or territorial education work, evenings with Charlotte. It was a lot, but it was working. The different pieces of her life were fitting together in a way they hadn't before. In October, a letter came from Boston. Eliza recognized the handwriting immediately, her mother's precise, controlled script. She held the envelope for a long time before opening it. The letter was brief. Her father had died. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. The funeral had been the previous week. Her mother thought she should know, though she understood if Eliza chose not to respond. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the years of silence, no recognition of the pain she'd caused. Just facts, delivered in her mother's typical emotionless style. Eliza read it twice, waiting to feel something. Grief for her father, anger at her mother, regret for the relationship that had died long before he did. But all she felt was distance. That life, those people, they belonged to someone else now, someone she used to be. "My father died," she told Caleb that evening. "I'm sorry." "I'm not sure I am. That's awful, isn't it? My own father, and I feel nothing." "You feel what you feel. He chose not to be in your life. You don't owe him grief now." "My mother wants me to write back. I can tell from the tone of the letter she wants reconciliation. Do you want that?" Eliza thought about it honestly. No, she had years to reach out, to apologize, to admit she was wrong. She chose her pride over her daughter. "I'm not interested in pretending that's forgivable just because my father died." She wrote back a brief note expressing condolences, but making clear she had no interest in rekindling their relationship. It felt harsh, final. It felt right. "You're allowed to close doors," Margaret said when Eliza told her. "Not everything has to be repaired or reconciled. Some things are better left behind." Margaret had her own news. She'd been corresponding with a man in Cheyenne, a widower with 2 children who'd written to her through a mutual acquaintance. They'd been exchanging letters for months, and he wanted to visit. "Are you interested?" Eliza asked. "Maybe. He sounds kind, respectful. He knows about my past, about leaving my husband, and he doesn't seem to care." Margaret smiled slightly. "He's a lawyer. Not wealthy, but comfortable. Says he's looking for a partner, not a servant." "Sounds like you might be interested." "I'm terrified," Margaret admitted. "What if I'm making the same mistake? What if he's just better at hiding who he really is? Then you leave, like you did before. But Margaret, you can't let fear of what might go wrong keep you from trying. Otherwise, you'll be alone forever." The man, Thomas Whitaker, visited in November. He was in his 40s, quiet but warm, clearly nervous about making a good impression. He was kind to Charlotte, respectful to Eliza and Caleb, and obviously smitten with Margaret. "He seems decent," Caleb said, watching Thomas and Margaret walk by the creek. "Decent is a low bar. Better than most people clear. Your sister could do a lot worse." By the time Thomas left, he and Margaret had an understanding. They'd continue corresponding through the winter, and if things went well, they'd marry in the spring. Margaret would move to Cheyenne, help raise his children, start fresh with a man who valued her. "I'm happy for you," Eliza said, meaning it, "but I'll miss you." "I'll only be a day's ride away. We'll visit." Margaret hugged her. "Thank you for giving me a place to heal, for showing me that women can have lives beyond what society tells them they should want. You did that yourself. I just gave you space to figure it out." Winter came early and hard. By December, they were snowed in, the world reduced to the ranch and the immediate struggle of keeping animals and people alive. Eliza used the forced stillness to write, developing more curriculum materials, corresponding with teachers across the territory, planning for the spring. Charlotte turned 2 in the middle of a blizzard, celebrated with a cake Margaret made and presents Caleb had been carving in secret for months. She was growing into herself, fierce and curious, and completely convinced she could do anything the adults could do. "She's going to be a handful," Anna said, watching Charlotte demand to help shovel snow. "She already is," Eliza replied, "but she wouldn't have it any other way." The winter also brought time for reflection. Eliza found herself thinking about the past 3 years, about everything that had changed. She'd arrived in Wyoming broken, desperate, convinced her life was over, and instead she'd built something better than anything she'd lost. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Caleb one evening, taking a chance on a stranger with a scandal. "Not once. You? Not even a little." She leaned against him. "I thought I'd lost everything when Boston happened. Lost my career, my reputation, my family, but I didn't lose anything that actually mattered. I just lost the illusion that those things defined me. And now? Now I know who I am. Not someone's daughter, or someone's scandal, or even someone's wife, just myself. Eliza Rourke, teacher, rancher, mother, person who refused to be destroyed by other people's lies." Spring arrived in March with the kind of warmth that felt like a promise. Margaret married Thomas in a quiet ceremony at the church, wearing a dress Eliza had helped her sew. The wedding was nothing like the elaborate Boston affair she'd had the first time, but Margaret's smile was genuine in a way it never had been before. "Be happy," Eliza told her sister. "I will be. I really think I will be." After Margaret left for Cheyenne, the house felt emptier, but Eliza threw herself into work, and the spring brought new challenges that demanded her attention. The Territorial Education Board wanted to establish a training institute for teachers, and they wanted Eliza to run it. It would mean more travel, more responsibility, more time away from home. It would also mean the chance to shape education across Wyoming in a fundamental way. "I don't know if I can do it," she told Caleb. "Charlotte's still so young. The ranch needs attention. I'm already stretched thin." "So hire more help. Expand, grow. You've got the settlement money, and the ranch is profitable. Use the resources you have." That feels like, I don't know, like I'm buying my way out of motherhood. You're not buying out of anything. You're investing in your ability to do the work you're meant to do. There's a difference. Eliza thought about Charlotte, about what lessons she wanted her daughter to learn, what example she wanted to set. Was it better to be a mother who sacrificed everything for her child, or a mother who pursued meaningful work and showed her daughter that women could be more than just caregivers? She took the position. The Territorial Education Board gave her an office in Cheyenne, a budget for materials and staff, and the authority to reshape how teaching was done across Wyoming. Eliza hired 2 assistants, developed a comprehensive training program, and began recruiting teachers who shared her vision. The work was demanding, exhilarating, and deeply satisfying. She spent 2 weeks each month in Cheyenne, the other 2 at the ranch with Charlotte and Caleb. It wasn't perfect. She missed Charlotte terribly when she was gone, worried constantly about what she was missing, but it was working. Charlotte thrived with the arrangement. She had Anna during the day, Caleb in the evenings, and 2 weeks each month with Eliza's undivided attention. She learned early that her mother did important work, that women could have careers and families, that there were many ways to be a good parent. By Charlotte's 3rd birthday, Eliza had trained over 40 teachers and helped establish 15 new schools across Wyoming. The work was getting noticed beyond the territory. She received letters from educators in Colorado, Montana, even California, asking about her methods. "You're becoming famous," Caleb said, reading a letter from a newspaper in Denver requesting an interview. "I'm becoming useful. There's a difference." But she did the interview, told her story carefully, leaving out the worst of the Boston scandal, but making clear she'd come west after facing professional setbacks. Talked about education, opportunity, the importance of giving all children access to knowledge regardless of where they lived or who their parents were. The article, when it published, was titled "The School Marm Who's Revolutionizing Western Education." Eliza hated the headline, too dramatic, too focused on her instead of the work. But the content was solid. It brought more attention, more requests, more opportunities. It also brought criticism. Letters from people who thought women shouldn't work outside the home, who believed education made people discontent with their station, who were convinced that Eliza's methods were too progressive, too dangerous, too Eastern. "They're scared," Margaret said during a visit. "Scared of what it means when women have power, when children learn to think for themselves. Ignore them." Hard to ignore when they're writing to the Territorial Board demanding I be fired. "Are you going to be fired?" "No, the board supports me. But it's exhausting, constantly having to defend myself, prove my worth, justify my existence." "Welcome to being a woman with ambition," Margaret said dryly. "It never stops. You just get better at not caring." The Territorial Board did more than support Eliza. They promoted her. In the summer of Charlotte's 4th year, they made her the territory's first official superintendent of education. The position came with real power, budget authority, hiring decisions, the ability to set policy across all of Wyoming's schools. Eliza stood in the board's office in Cheyenne, looking at the official letter of appointment, and felt the weight of it. This was what she'd been working toward without quite realizing it. The chance to build something systematic, something that would outlast her individual efforts. "What do you think?" Henry Blackwell asked. He'd become a friend over the years, an ally in the fight for quality education. "I think I'm terrified," Eliza admitted. "I think there are people who are going to fight me every step of the way. I think this is going to be harder than anything I've done so far. And and I'm saying yes anyway. The work that followed was exactly as difficult as she'd feared. Eliza spent years fighting for funding, arguing with legislators who saw education as a luxury, pushing back against communities that wanted to maintain the status quo. She wrote policy, visited schools, trained teachers, and gradually, painfully slowly, changed how Wyoming thought about education. Charlotte grew up watching her mother work, learned to read before she was 5, could do basic arithmetic by 6, asked questions about everything. She spent time at the ranch learning from Caleb, time at the school watching Eliza teach, time in Cheyenne seeing her mother navigate the political world. "I want to be like you when I grow up," Charlotte said one evening when she was 7. "What do you mean?" "I want to do important work, help people, make things better." Eliza pulled her daughter close. "You can be anything you want. Teacher, rancher, doctor, lawyer, anything. The world is open to you in ways it wasn't open to me. But Charlotte, listen. Whatever you choose it because you want it. Not because someone expects it, not because it's safe or proper or what women are supposed to do. Choose it because it makes you who you are." By the time Charlotte was 10, Wyoming had over 50 schools, a teacher training program that was considered the best in the Western Territories, and a reputation for quality education that attracted families from across the country. Eliza had done that. Not alone, she'd had help from countless teachers, administrators, and community members, but she'd been the driving force. The ranch had grown too. Caleb had expanded to over 2,000 acres, employed 8 full-time hands, and was considered one of the most successful ranchers in the region. He and Eliza were partners in every sense, running both the ranch and their household as a team. They had Charlotte, and 3 years after her, a son they named William after Caleb's father. Will was quieter than his sister, more thoughtful, but just as determined. The cabin had been expanded twice more, and now resembled a proper house with 6 rooms, a real kitchen, and space for a growing family. Margaret and Thomas had 3 children of their own and visited regularly. The sisters were close in a way they'd never been in Boston, bonded by shared experience and mutual respect rather than obligation and social expectation. On Charlotte's 12th birthday, Eliza sat on the porch of their house watching her daughter ride across the pasture with Will trailing behind her on his pony. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Caleb came out and sat beside her. "Thinking?" he asked, remembering. "It's been almost 13 years since I stepped off that stagecoach. Longest gamble either of us ever took. Best gamble, too." She looked at him. "I wouldn't change anything. Not the fear, not the struggle, not any of it, because it all led here. No regrets? Not one." They sat in the quiet, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of knowing someone deeply. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been. Frightened, disgraced, desperate for a fresh start. That woman still existed somewhere inside her, but she'd been transformed by work and time and the choice to keep building even when things got hard. She thought about the legacy she was leaving, not just the schools and the policies, though those mattered, but the example. The proof that women could survive scandal, could rebuild from nothing, could do meaningful work and raise children and contribute to their communities in ways that changed lives. Charlotte would grow up knowing that, would never doubt her own worth, her own capability, her right to pursue whatever life she wanted. That was the real victory. Not the schools or the position or the recognition, but the daughter who believed she could be anything. The territorial board had been talking about statehood. Wyoming might become a state within the decade, and when it did, they wanted Eliza to be the first state superintendent of education. It was a conversation for another time, but the possibility sat on the horizon like a promise. "You gonna keep doing this?" Caleb asked. "The education work, I mean, as long as they'll let you?" "As long as I can make a difference, yes. Why stop now?" "No reason, just wanted to hear you say it." He smiled. "You're remarkable, you know that." "I'm stubborn, there's a difference." "You're both, and you're mine." "How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Eliza said. "We chose each other. We chose this life. We keep choosing it every single day." That was the truth of it. The lesson she'd learned through years of building something from nothing. Life wasn't about luck or fate or destiny. It was about choices. Small ones, daily ones, the constant decision to keep going even when it would be easier to quit. She'd chosen to get on that stagecoach, chosen to stay when Caleb offered her partnership, chosen to teach, to fight for better schools, to pursue work that mattered even when it was difficult, chosen to be a mother without giving up the rest of herself, chosen to build instead of hiding, to grow instead of shrinking, to become instead of remaining. And Caleb had made his choices too, to give a disgraced stranger a chance, to see her as an equal partner, to support her ambitions even when it complicated his life, to raise children who knew their mother did important work beyond the home. Together, they'd created something neither could have built alone. A ranch that thrived, a family that loved each other, a community that valued education and opportunity, a life that was theirs. Charlotte rode back to the house as the last light faded, her face flushed with exercise and joy. She dismounted and ran up the porch steps, throwing herself at Eliza. "Did you see how fast we were going? Will almost kept up with me." "I saw. You're getting better every day. Someday I'm going to ride faster than anyone in the territory." "I believe you, Say," Eliza said, and meant it. If anyone could do it, her daughter could. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eliza stood at the window of the bedroom she shared with Caleb and looked out at the land they'd built their life on. The mountains were dark shapes against the stars, the pastures a sea of shadow. Somewhere out there, cattle grazed and horses dozed, and the land waited for morning. This was home. Not Boston with its society and rules and judgment, not the past she'd fled, but here in this rough country that demanded everything and gave back meaning in return. She'd come here broken and had found herself, had learned that scandal couldn't define her unless she let it. That reputation mattered far less than character, that the world's judgment of her worth meant nothing compared to her own knowledge of who she was. She'd come here alone and had found partnership. Not the kind taught in finishing schools where women deferred and men commanded, but real partnership, built on respect and trust and the daily work of building something together. She'd come here expecting to survive and instead had thrived, had done work that mattered, raised children who would change the world in their own ways, created a legacy that would outlast her body. She'd come here running from shame and had found purpose. That was the truth of it, the story she would tell if anyone asked. Not that Wyoming had saved her, she'd saved herself, but Wyoming had given her the space to do it, had offered her land and opportunity and a community that valued action over gossip, competence over pedigree, truth over appearance. And she'd taken that gift and built something beautiful from it. Caleb came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "Come to bed. In a minute. You're thinking too much again." "I'm thinking exactly enough." She turned in his arms. "We did good, didn't we? With all of this?" "We did better than good. We did exactly what we set out to do. We built a life worth living." And that, Eliza thought as she let him lead her to bed, was all anyone could really ask for. Not perfection, not ease, not freedom from struggle or doubt, but a life worth living, a life chosen, built, defended, a life that meant something. The woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 13 years ago would barely recognize the person Eliza had become. And that was exactly as it should be. Growth meant change. Healing meant transformation. Building a new life meant leaving the old one behind, not just geographically, but fundamentally. She'd been Eliza Whitmore once, defined by scandal and shame and other people's opinions. Then she'd become Eliza Rourke, rancher's wife and frontier teacher. Now she was just Eliza, mother, educator, partner, builder of the life she'd chosen. And someday, when she was gone, people would remember her for the schools she'd built, the children she'd taught, the opportunities she'd created. They'd remember her as someone who refused to be destroyed by lies, who turned exile into opportunity, who proved that women could do important work and raise families and change the world. But more than that, her children would remember her as someone who chose authenticity over appearance, courage over safety, growth over comfort. They would know that their mother had faced destruction and had built something better from the ruins. That was legacy. That was victory. That was enough. Outside, the Wyoming night spread endless and beautiful, full of stars and possibility and the promise of morning. Inside, Eliza Rourke, teacher, mother, superintendent, partner, survivor, builder, closed her eyes and slept the sleep of someone who knew exactly who she was and had no regrets about how she got there. The world she'd been told to want had rejected her, so she'd built a better one instead. And in doing so, she'd redefined what was possible, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. That was the real story. Not survival, but transformation. Not endurance, but creation. Not settling, but thriving. And it had all started with one choice, made in dust and desperation, to take a chance on a life that nobody else would have chosen for her. Sometimes the best things come from the ruins of what we thought we wanted. Sometimes exile is just freedom wearing a different name. Sometimes the world that rejects us is doing us a favor, pushing us toward the life we were meant to build all along. Eliza had learned that the hard way, but she'd learned it, and that made all the difference.